one of the most inspiring speakers for everyone. Lots of people said so.
You can stay. Thanks, Veronica.
And his amazing bio is on the table.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
What have I done? There's some bad news, and there's some good news. The bad news is that I didn't know till I looked at the programme this morning that I was supposed to prepare something to say. The good news is that my tech can't fail as a result of not having prepared anything. The even worse news is I've never let not being prepared get in the way of saying something loudly and with great confidence. Veronica named this session, and also we're 10 minutes late starting, so I'll try to be brisk in it, so I'm off the hook. Named this Ecotones, which is doubtless a word I would have used. Did I use the word ecotone? I did. Oh, well, one of you is nodding and one of you is not nodding. So one of you heard me use the word ecotone and the other didn't. An ecotone, technically, in ecology is a place of interface where two environments come together. We are on an ecotone looking out right here. The river meets the land, and although we humans have done god-awful things to the land either side of the river and fairly god-awful things to the river, that is an ecotone. It is a meeting of two environments, and meetings of environments are places of fluidity, they're places of flux, they're places of enormous dynamism, and they're usually places of tremendous diversity. And if we think about our Norfolk, ecotones are everywhere. If you just think in terms of the map and the regions that we have in Norfolk, if you start in the extreme west, you've got the fens, which are bleeding into this beautiful river, draining their way out to the North Sea through the Wash. And then to the east of them, you have the Brecks, the chalk right at the surface with a fine layer of sand over the surface. And then to the east of that, if you carry on to the south, you've got heavier, jumbled up clayey, chalky soils, which arrived in the Jurassic, and also which the clay comes from the Jurassic. Tim should be listening to me here. To the north of that, the centre of Norfolk all sits on the chalk, which many of you have been talking around. And then right across the north of Norfolk, you've got coastal environments, sand dunes and salt marshes and shingle beaches. And wherever these things meet, and of course there's a network of wonderful rivers flowing right the way across the land between them, you have ecotones. But if there are any pure ecologists in the room, I need to apologise at this point because I'm now going to stretch the concept of ecotone, because we ourselves are inherently ecotones. You're all sitting there licking the bits of granary bread from between your teeth. And that is an act of ecology. That is an act of taking food from our environment, of taking nutrients from the environment, taking the energy of the sun, taking the water of the clouds, whether or not they exist, Tim, and incorporating them for a brief spell in your own cells. And some of you may not have noticed, but I scurried off from lunch to have a quiet and surreptitious wee. And that is also part of the same process, because I sat drinking coffee all morning, and then there came a point at which the coffee wanted to flow and become part of another non-living and then probably eventually living thing. We are all filters. We are all places of connectivity between different states. We are all boundaries between things. And that can be both a very creative thing and a very destructive thing. And when I look at the landscape as a conservationist, I see it mostly as a destructive thing, because listening to the inspiring work that Russell does, and many others here who campaign and work on nature and the environment, everywhere we have slain nature to the point at which she is gasping her last, pushed her to the very boundaries, and we have created fractal ecotones across the landscape where nature wants to have the space to flow, to connect, to rejoin, and we keep pushing her back. And of course, just this week, the government is in the process of stripping back further the laws that protect nature from the development of the landscape. So we are edges, and we inhabit edges, but we also create layer upon layer upon layer of edges with our destruction. But the flip side of that is that we also have the power within us to create positively, to put back, to campaign, to influence, which is really what the power of the human voice, the human hand, the human heart, the human spirit is, to influence others to act in a positive way with regard to landscape, nature, and our shared environment. So we are all interface, and I think ultimately the act of being artist is an act of interface. It is an act of looking on the natural world as she is, inherently in herself, and choosing an element of that to interpret in a way that speaks to the artist and from the artist to the viewer or the experiencer or the listener or whatever it is. So with that, I'm going to pass on to our first speaker, who is Michelle Wood. But before that, I want to read one tiny little thing that made me chuckle from this morning. At some point, I've been jotting notes all morning, and at some point, somebody said, Anglia water. And as I quickly wrote notes, I wrote angular water. And that struck me as an absurd, a Dadaist moment for the day. Over to you, Michelle.
No videos now. Okay, thanks for that introduction. My name's Michelle Wood. I'm a artist specialising in print, formerly an economic geographer and academic researcher, and these things will come through some of my presentation. Through my work, and I think it's picking up on the geographer part of me in particular, is I respond to place. And doing prep for this talk, and I'm fortunate to do another one on Monday, and I've tracked back and I know what I do, but I've realised what I do, and I respond to place. So, and I love it. So through this, residency, I've responded through ecology and through some of my previous work. Sometimes economy comes in, definitely print, love materials, I absolutely love process, and emotion comes in. So they're the things that I want to bring in this afternoon. So responding to edge landscapes, exploring ecological transformation through printmaking. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. Like many of us here, curious people, were drawn to edge places, edge landscapes. Carl Flynn talks about islands of abandonment, those depopulated or decaying places where nature can respond and reclaim, particularly coastal landscapes, like this one from my home base in Whitley Bay. I'm from Northumberland, originally southeast Northumberland, a place called Blythe, a very interesting town. It's got its dichotomies, if you can put it that way. It's home and inspiration, the North Sea coast. The coastal edge has always been there, always, since a child, and even before that, with my Norwegian ancestry that came across. So the North Sea is always been a constant. The academic researcher in me is drawn to diagrams like this one by Natural England, so doing a bit of research for this presentation. Looking at those kinds of diagrams that kind of plan, plot, map, help us compare across places, if you like. It's very comprehensive. As you can see, it talks about natural forms as well as kind of sensory issues. But it's a diagram, it's flat. And I think it's that, what kind of, and it's come out of some of the other talks, it's that dissociation between some of the language that we use and some of those diagrams that are very useful as humans, very useful for us, but it's that dichotomy between that and the reality. And the reality is where I'm at home, in the water, on the water, colder the better, said she. Don't hold us to that. But these are places, they're places of emotional resonance in particular. They're places of transformation, Rachel Carson, I had a wonderful chat with Helen. Thank you so much last night for revealing some more about Rachel Carson to me. Talked about the strange and beautiful place where the sea meets the land. So it's that gap, I suppose, between the diagram and the reality is something I'm particularly interested in. I'm going to go back a little bit to go forwards. So this is a piece of work I did before coming on the residency. It's about the decline of Northumberland coastal plants called Collective Loss. Just very briefly, I want to mention it. It was inspired by some research by the Natural History Society of Northumbria, a long-standing organisation, wonderful to do some amazing work up there, engagement work, research, etc. So that was my source of information, and I chose 27 plants to draw. These are all plants that are either at the at-risk or declining or have gone from Northumberland coast, the South Northumberland coast. So I used copper plates and letterpress. So the copper plates are soft ground etchings. They're very sensitive surface. You can draw into them. These are drawings. You can etch them. These are really heavily etched. I can't remember how many hours they were in the etch. You can kind of see, second one in is kind of snowy, and that's to do with that deep etch, and it becomes embossed when you print it. They're printed as ghost prints, where you ink up once, and you print and you print and you print, and the ink fades, and it creates these beautiful ghost prints over time. Fading, delicate is a metaphor for loss. I've named the plants with letterpress, fixed them, revered them with metal and ink, and just to quickly say, at the same time as I was working on these plates, this project, I lost Mum and Dad in quick succession at the same time from southeast Northumberland. So it's a representation of grief for the loss of family and the loss of the natural world. And in the letterpress, the lost are remembered as names, just as we do with kind of plaques on chairs, on benches. So to the Norfolk coast. Well, I wonder why I chose this one. It could have had something to do with your amazingly passionate talk, maybe. I think that's probably a big part of it. But the other big part is the North Sea. It was an absolute no-brainer that this had to be the place. Out of all the places, Veronica, it was an amazing time. Thank you. But this was the place I was drawn to. It's the shingle spit of Blakeney and Cley. Shared connection with the North Sea, familiar body of water. As you were talking, I was watching the sea and thinking, how do I get in there? How do I get out of there if I get in there? Because there's this steep incline, and there's this wave, constant wave, and there's the shingle that clatters your ankles. But it's that kind of visceral, material feel on your body. Doing a bit of research, I found the shared connections with Newcastle. So through trade lines, coal was down from Newcastle way back when they had working ports, and it was a busy kind of time for Blakeney and Cley in economic terms. So the coal came down, and guess what went back? Malt. And I'd like to think it was for the famous beer, but it was probably a little bit early for that. But, you know, it may be the precursor to the Newcastle Brown. Different terrains, but in Norfolk, there were echoes of Northumberland, and I think one of the big pulls for me was when you started to talk about the plants there. So the plants that you mentioned and we saw, plants like sea wormwood, sea blight, sea purslane, sea campion, some others. Those were all on the loss list up in Northumberland. So here they were. I could see them, I could touch them, I could photograph them. So very resilient plants. They're living in stones on the North Sea coast, on that edge place, on that edge landscape. Very resilient. And I just, looking at Derek Jarman, a quick quote from his, talking about his Dungeness shingle garden. He talks about how it sings with the winds in winter, bracing the salt which sails in plumes from the rolling breakers that gnaw the shingle. Amazing. I mean, it's captured the hardy extreme weather and sea conditions that those plants are facing. And back to Rachel Carson, only the most hardy and adaptable can survive in a region so mutable. So when I got back to Micah's amazing studio, thanks Micah, I started to do some makings. And if it's okay, can I hand some out? Sorry, I'll just, I don't know, just, if you just pass them around. From print to object. So I've called it findings and fragments. So I started to do some microscopic analysis of the plants. I had a portable microscope, I had a botanist's lens, I had some Japanese mulberry paper, so I started to make monoprint drawings. And I wanted to take the forces that these plants were facing on the coastal spit, on that edge landscape. I wanted to take those forces and translate them. So manipulated with steeped water, you can see the little packages drying on the windowsill, formed, squashed, squeezed. Japanese paper is so fragile but so strong. It's just an amazing kind of material to work with. So I could scrunch them, add heated beeswax, harden them with plaster, and they're quite tactile, which is why I wanted to pass them round. And I worked them with my hands, and they became kind of sculptural paper stones, if you like, or relics of resilience, maybe. And there's the fragments down in the bottom corner there of the pieces that came off when I'd worked the pieces. And alongside the stones, in order to present them, I think, Veronica, you responded during the Zoom, and it was like that question of how will I show these? So when I got back up north, I'm a member of Northern Print. It's an open access print studio. And I decided to do a 3-plate etching, which is about 1.2 metres long, 3 plates worked, of the map of Blakeney, of the shingle spit. Drawn to Dennis Cosgrove's edited book of writings about mappings. He talks about mapping as spatial fixing, order and control. But then he goes on to say there's uncertainties and complexities, obviously, with conventional mapping. And the lived reality is a coastline with spatial flow, fluidity, transgression. Mapping imposes order, but coasts defy boundaries. With making the map, it's a soft ground etching. There's an instability with it. The fluid lines were painted with a gull's feather. It's a sugar lift solution. Copper washed with salt and vinegar to clean it. But in the acid, it's a balancing act of making and losing marks. The process is uncertain, blind, and transformative. And it mirrors the natural processes of erosion and change. So hopefully mapping Blakeney, the etching captures that tension, lines that shift, erode or dissolve under acid, just as the shorelines do under the sea. And just to finish, this is a glimpse of the piece in the gallery. It's in a kind of under glass on a table. And it shows the etching alongside some of the stones, the paper stones, and some of the fragments from the process. So, thank you.
Now we hand over to Caroline Forward.
All right. Hello, I'm Caroline Forward and I'm a Cambridgeshire artist. what a brilliant and intense and overwhelming week we had. And thank you to Veronica and all the amazing site leaders who shared their expertise with us. So for Fluid Earth, I considered coastal erosion, how the process of displacement and deposition of land, as it separates, transforms, reforms, integrates in new areas, is similar to that experienced by displaced people, of whom there are too many. Not just those whose homes are falling off the cliffs, but the millions displaced through current conflicts, natural forces, and economy. And how this impacts on landscape, belonging, and identity. And it's these processes that I've explored in my work for Fluid Earth. During Research Week, we looked at the impact of one action on another, at the challenges to identity in a shifting landscape, at adaptation to change in many different situations. Questions were raised over intervention, management, not doing, letting go, and a whole lot more. Again and again, I felt fragility and resilience in this beautiful, ancient, shifting Norfolk coastline as it moves and changes, the inevitability of constant change and our need to adapt to and change with it. So how was I going to explore and express this creatively? I'm a painter and I develop tactile materiality within the paint. But something was drawing me to making paper from seaweed and creating a piece about suspension, holding, hanging on, fluidity, vulnerability and strength. And around this piece, I wanted to depict the eroding chalk cliffs and also to use found materials to explore the themes of movement, loss, integration and non-integration of different materials, because all these occur during displacement and deposition. We are living on the edge in many different ways as climate change impacts our environment. In this experimental piece, I wanted to highlight words spoken by people whose homes are at risk of falling into the sea. Like Susan, I also contacted Sue Grime. So Sue Grime of Coastwise met us on the eroding cliff top at Trimmingham, with strict instructions to keep back from the edge. Sue gave me access to reports from Coastwise cafe sessions held in villages along the North Norfolk cliff tops, from East Cromer across to Haysborough. Here are some of the residents' comments that struck me most powerfully. How long have we got? Our graves will fall into the sea. What happens when the road goes? What can we keep? What are we prepared to let go? Why not us? Why others? I printed these and other words on seemingly fragile but remarkably strong Kozo paper. They're powerful statements and they float against my thicker handmade seaweed paper with its own fragile edges. Making paper from seaweed is a process of transformation, which is part of the displacement process. And why seaweed? Well, seaweed's heralded as a superpower with many potential uses. It's a storer of carbon, it acts as a buffer to reduce the power of the waves, and offers a habitat for marine organisms. Seaweed is in the sea that the cliffs and houses will fall into. And seaweed species are having to move location as sea temperatures change. And invasive species, as we know, can weaken existing species and change the balance of delicate ecosystems. Now, hopefully this next one hasn't got sound. How do I get it to play? Just click it again? Okay, just watch the shadows. At Trimmingham, the cliffs are made up of an unstable mix of silts, sands, clays and gravels. They erode via rapid, large-scale landslides and slumps when the cliffs get saturated at a rate predicted by shoreline management plans of an average loss of 0.75 to 1.5 metres for the next 100 years. The current policy of managed realignment at Trimmingham is changing this year to no active intervention, and people's distress is palpable. Further west at Hunstanton are the spectacular vertical red and white chalk cliffs where fallen boulders lie at the base of the cliffs, and the average annual rate of erosion is 13.2 centimetres. The policy is no active intervention until about 2075, when it will change to hold the line to protect clifftop assets such as the road. And so to chalk. There's a lot of chalk in Norfolk. Chalk formed during the Cretaceous period between 70 to 100 million years ago in a warm tropical sea. It's primarily composed of the skeletal remains of billions of microscopic organisms that lived, died, and accumulated on the sea floor over millions of years. And this made me think about how insignificant we as humans are in the context of deep time, and the massive impact we've had on the planet in the short time of our human existence. Chalk, it filtrates and absorbs, it cracks and erodes, it seeps and it sheds. It's solid and it crumbles to dust. I ground lumps of chalk to powder and added it to the layers of old oil paint and cold wax for these 3 paintings. I wanted to give a feel of the tension between the apparent solidity of the cliff and its sense of movement and flow. And I also wanted to celebrate chalk. Changing Places is a series of little panels, experiments in separation, reforming, and integration of land, particles, and elements after the disruption of erosion, and looking at whether or how identities change, merge, transform, or remain the same during this process. I collected natural and found materials rich in their diversity: chalks, mud, sand, seaweed, wood, loam, vegetation, discarded plastic boat rope from beaches and other sites we visited. And I wondered about the surface to work on, whether it should be stable or unstable, about the constraints of edges, the hard lines of the panels. And then I thought about intensive agricultural practices where fields are blocked out in geometric squares and rectangles. Soft hedgerows are removed, straight boundaries are enforced. About managed realignment and non-action, and about how rivers have been straightened, and how land has had to conform to human demand. How these materials I collected may have been blown, drenched, scorched by natural elements, extracted, trodden on, moved around by humans. They have had to adapt to new constraints imposed by climate, nature, and by people. So actually the small straight edge panels felt very appropriate. When making these little pieces, I've been led by the materials. So in fact, some of the materials are mixed up and some aren't. Some materials have agreed to stay on the panel, while others seem to think their journey isn't yet over and are gently shedding. I don't know how they'll behave over time, and with coastal erosion, we don't know exactly how land will behave over time. I have brought in, there's a small interactive piece in the gallery, and I have brought in a little, I'm a great believer in play, a little piece that you can move around and explore different edges. So I invite you to play with them, move them around, change their places, neighbours, explore their edges and juxtapositions. I'm struck by how adaptive the natural world is, as Nick and other site leaders so brilliantly illustrated. And I have a great memory of Nick talking with the birds as he showed us the plants and stones of the Ecotone at Cly. Rebecca Solnit's words, "When you give yourself to places, they give you yourself back," are a reminder that there could be a rich reciprocal relationship between humans and our environment. When our landscapes, both external and internal, shift, blur, and change, we have to find ways to belong with new neighbours, to process loss and transformation, to work with nature and not against it. Thank you.
Gorgeous words from both of our first two speakers. Because we're running a little late and because Michelle needs to catch a train, I'm going to slightly reorder and just ask for a couple of specific questions for Michelle before she leaves. And Caroline, if you don't mind, we'll bump you into the next panel, which you were going to be invited to join anyway. Is that all right? Yes, so are there any specific questions for Michelle? Russ.
You were talking about the loss of plants. Why?
I'm going to repeat that because it's on the mic. Russ's question was about the loss of plants in Northumberland, presumably. Yeah.
And why? That's a good question.
Oh, we need to turn on the...
Sorry. That's a really good question, thank you. So partly in response to a call out, so I'm a member of Northern Print, which is an open access print studio, an amazing place up in Newcastle. And they were doing, just at the right time, a call out for a project about endangered species. And I knew Dad wasn't very well, and I knew that I needed to make work that was quite concise, so I started to make plates. So I knew I could manage it in light of what was going on at home, back at their home. And also that response to endangered species just caught us. And I've always, as a child, collected and walked and with my parents, and they set a love of wildflowers. And so it just seemed to all make sense to kind of follow that path, really. And because it was South Northumberland, which is my bay, I mean, Northumberland is just a phenomenal coast, as everybody knows, but South Northumberland is quite built up, it's quite often left behind, and I just thought it was a chance to give a kind of focus on that, and at the same time then respond to this call out and produce a piece of work with the 27 that I chose, all deeply etched, all printed on beautiful Japanese paper and all alongside the names labelled. And then just as life can chuck things at you, as we know, the both went, my mum and dad both went, and it just seemed apt to kind of just have that as a bit of honouring to them as well. Yeah, so, but thank you for asking, yeah. Yeah.
Russ, were you also asking about the causes of decline of the plants?
Well, that's another good question to which I might not know all the answers. I think probably it's probably erosion. It's probably impact of humans. And I know certainly as a child, I grew up in Blythe. Blythe had an amazing beach full of sand dunes, depleted over the years. We now have none at our end, so no, taken by the council for building projects and other developers. So at our end of the beach, Seaton Sluice has got some amazing dunes, and obviously the plants that would have thrived there, but we've lost that through the will of the developers, and you know, we've talked about that in previous sessions, is that, yeah, what are we doing? But they're very, very vivid memories. Just on a light note, and I didn't have time in my talk to mention it, but there is a project called Life Wader, which is actually North Northumberland, where they're trying to reclaim some of the dunes. And in that instance, the loss of natural plants has been because people have been chucking away like things like ivy, things that have taken over the dunes and swamped. So, but Life Wader is a great project to check out if anybody's interested. It's a 5-year project where they're actually bringing diggers in, which looks like, oh hell, you know what they're doing, but actually it's with the purpose of reclaiming the dunes from these invasive species that humans have put there to enable the original or the native plants to come back and thrive. So that's kind of part of the picture anyway, yeah. Thanks, yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have one more question for Michelle before she has to chase away? Oh, there's a hand there. I'll repeat the question to the mic if that's all right.
I wanted to ask you about your sculptures, Michelle, because I think you haven't done anything like that before, perhaps in that way.
Yeah.
I'll just,
Oh,
for the mic
sorry.
recording, I'll repeat the question, which was about your sculptures,
Thank
Michelle, and them being a new departure in your work, and whether there's something you're going to continue exploring.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Thank you. Yes, to the second question, absolutely. And I have been meddling with those kinds of materials for some time. And the closest project to making those kind of small foams was a project, again, a Northern Print project, back in 2014, so some time ago, where I made a series of paper teacups in response to a project about an old ceramics factory called the Mailing Pottery Factory. Mailing Pottery was one of the Newcastle's big sellers way back, 1930s, etc. And I just wanted to pay homage to them by making these little foams, but they were formed from just paper and print, whereas these ones have got more bits in them. But yes, please. They're about very much. And what was amazing was to have that, you know, that input. I mean, you know, Veronica, that was just, that feeding research week was just phenomenal. And then things pop out, don't they? As you've seen over the years, I'm sure. Some amazing and amusing, I'm sure, as well. But, you know, working at Micah's, I mean, we were lucky to be there around the same time and to have Micah's barn space. And you know, Micah, thanks for being so, you kept saying, oh, I can help, oh, I've got that, and I really appreciated that. So I think it just, they came together, and then that research into the hardiness of these resilience of these plants and what they face, and they're there. And they're there, whatever the weather, you know, whatever the time of year, they're there. And you're just like, you've got to revere them, really. And those, playing with those materials seem to be a very apt way. And I did want to pass them round because they're not what they seem, and they're to be touched, really. So I did feel the need to share. Yeah. But thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah. Yes, I'll collect them as I
yes,
as
before
I run.
you leave. We'll come to some questions for you, Caroline, in a second, but we need to let Michelle go. Before you go, I don't normally want to promote my stuff, but it so happens that this week I've written a Guardian Country Diary for the first week of December sometime, and it's about a shipwreck that's on the backside of Blakeney Point that belonged to my great-great-grandfather, who owned the last shipping company.
Right.
And I went out to place my hand on it and think about permanence and family in place and the trade, etc. And while you were speaking, it was exactly what I've been writing about this week.
It resonates, doesn't it?
Completely.
It really does. And then when you've got those ancestral stories and they're in you, even if you don't know about them, when you find out about them, they really resonate, and it's a wonderful way to connect with a place. And I did, if I'd had more time, it would have been good to do more about the trade lines, but, you know, and this project really wasn't about that. But yes, and I've been saying to my colleagues, I'd love to meet up again, so maybe that's a good chance. But thank you.
Thanks for your contribution today.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I have to go.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Shall we take a question or two for Caroline and then bring or do you want to?
One thing I just wanted to say that suddenly popped into my head about indigenous culture, because there's a lot of pretentious twaddle, frankly, talked about indigenous cultures and how, well, you know, how one thinks that they're othered, you know, they're elsewhere. But actually what we don't talk about is indigenous culture here, because it's actually become toxic. It's been taken over by the far right. But one way in which you are doing, you know, you can rehabilitate that sense of belonging and really understanding the land. And I think that comes through in quite a lot of people's works. Yeah. And we have to find a way to talk about it that retrieves that from either end of the thinking about indigenousness.
Absolutely, and it is powerful. Yeah. Thanks, Veronica.
Safe travels to you,
Thank
Michelle.
you, and thanks
Shall we? Do we have a question for Caroline and her work on the crumbling Trimmingham cliffs and her extraordinary interactive cubes. Come and play with her interactive cubes representing the landscape and seascape of the northeast Norfolk Cliffs. Do we have a question? A question here. Has Helen got the microphone? Yeah, if you would, thank you. Lovely microphone work, Ruth.
Yes, I could probably shout, but might as well. I know that you've used other kinds of materials in your painting before, Caroline, so it's not always, just oils or whatever. So I'm interested in that use of chalk. And was it very different from what you've done before, or was it a continuation of something about the textural, visceral, that really embodied feeling of working with a medium on the paintings?
I think it's been a continuation. It's been something that I've been playing with and investigating for quite a long time, but I hadn't actually collected materials and ground them down and used them in that way. And whilst I'd made a little bit of plant-based paper, I hadn't used seaweed before. And I'm still really intrigued by that. Not that I want to become a paper artist, but I'm looking at that sort of strength and fragility and how to achieve that and actually maybe incorporate it in what I'm doing as well. So, yeah, continuation, but it felt like a natural progression as well.
Does there exist much technical literature on turning a plant into paper?
There's bits in the on the internet, and we have a paper maker, a nettle paper maker.
Of course we do.
Here with us in the audience, who has an amazing booklet about making paper, and I think using plants for as in Helen Cook, I should give you your name, and I think there's a sort of standard procedure in a way for using plants to make paper, but you have to work with what the plant is capable of doing, as I'm discovering.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that a nettle is an inherently fibrous creature,
yes.
And an alga, which is what a seaweed is an inherently gelatinous creature and doesn't want to become paper. There was
I'm as a paper conservator, I've made loads of paper from lots of different fibres, and it's usually cellulose. I mean, if you make a macerated sheet from algae, you probably wouldn't call it paper.
Yeah, I think
technically.
Yes, I've used paper pulp with it in order to get the strength.
Absolutely.
So
you wouldn't. Because paper essentially is cellulose in some form or other, and it's So, I mean, it's a paper type thing. So
I stand corrected.
I'm a conservator. We get hooked up in technical stuff. So,
and I think, if it's part paper, does that make it or
it's
not?
It's part paper.
So it is part paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a. You can make a sheet of it, but it's like a sheet of plastic. It's a different material.
This is an ecotone.
There you
and
go.
What we have established is that you have pushed boundaries.
Thank you.
And you have created entirely new ways of thinking. Do we have another question for Caroline? I think we just have, yes, a moment. One at the back, Micah. Oh, and a microphone, thank you. A microphone.
Will you be presenting the work to the communities at Trimmingham?
Maybe I should contact Sue. It's a very good thought, actually, because she's, I think, did you find, Susan, that she's very receptive to being contacted? And maybe it might be good to talk to her about ways to, or possible ways to work with the work that I've done with the community. Thank you for that.
Lovely. Thank you for perfect timing. So we now move straight on to the creative duo of CW and WC.
Ready? Are we on? Yeah?
I think you need to narrow your screen.
No, I just need to do this.
Oh, yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Cecilia.
I'm Will.
We are the artist activist duo CWWC, and we developed our work counter-mapping the ecotone as part of the Fluid Earth residency, and you're going to be able to see some images on the screen. So it's a print, text and sound installation, and it stems from our existing project, Our Muddy Inheritance, working with global majority migrant and refugee communities in different port towns in the UK to build and decolonise community oral archives through an exploration of the links between ecologies and economies. So the thematic questions that we responded to apply for the Fluid Earth residency were as follows. How can we connect environmental issues with identity politics? How can we build bridges and have dialogues with diverse communities to consider the future of the planet? How can artists, artworks, and artful events stimulate greater public awareness and empathy with environmental issues? What could diverse perspectives on nature recovery look like? And how can onlookers and audiences become active participants?
These are questions that have been in the zeitgeist for decades now and have guided much of Cecilia and I's careers. As we witness a world not only in ecological crisis, but in the case of the UK, a world where we have literal fascists violently parading down our streets, and Labour Party politicians that would rather fund the slaughter of children in Palestine than they would look after the vulnerable, both human and more than human. These questions are the baseline of the ways in which art of and about the environment is also necessarily political, i.e. of the polis and of our communities. These contexts were brought into sharp focus for us all here during this residency, as while we were here making work, only a few miles down the road in Great Yarmouth, the largest neo-Nazi music festival in the UK for over 40 years took place, with the full knowledge, and we can only assume assent, of the local Reform Council and the police force.
So there's an assumption that diverse communities are in need of what ecological arts are offering, rather than as communities that have been and continue to engage in their own studies, theories and practices of art and ecology. So we ask ourselves, what does dialogue look like? Who does it need to involve? And what is crucial is community listening, listening to each other and listening together. What are you arriving with? What are the echoes in the community today? What needs in the community need to be uttered? What are you hearing from those not present? What legacies are unheard and still have resonance now? What has been expressed that needs to be activated?
So how can ecological art be something that listens and is born of listening and invites in contributions and that creates new co-constituents in cultural and political production? In the book, Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet, the editors remind us that some kinds of stories help us notice, while others get in the way. The stakes are too high to engage in ecological art which only concerns itself with spectacle. The politics of representation and speculation are not radical enough, nor ultimately are they useful to anyone beyond the artist themselves and the gallerist. Ecological art must constitute, or at the very least be born of or invite, material intervention in the world. Art about climate change, especially when it involves flying around the world in order to make and show it, is a fucking waste of resources and only fuels climate change.
Our work speaks to sites of contestation around the world, guided by the Yellow Star of Bethlehem, one of the hardy plants, alongside shrubby sea blight, eelgrass, sea beet, all of which can be found growing in Norfolk's Clee ecotone, alongside shingle, salt marshes, a dead seal that we found, scrap metal, seawater, dog shit and dog walkers. It calls the audience to listen and think about home and tension, migration, overcoming imposed or contrived divisions, and the co-creating of ways to live, survive, and die together. By drawing attention to the species and materials that coexist in these tension-filled environments and imagined borders, we connect the original botanical meaning of ecotone with its contemporary post-colonial usage. This act of countermapping is an invitation to engage with radical, theoretical, and activist tactics of solidarity against ecologies of domination. So we're now going to offer a short reading and sound piece, which is an extension of our exhibited work at GroundWork. This was always called the motherland. We were forced to call it so, from one island nation to another, to another.
Those who didn't were branded uncivilized, uneducated, because they looked to the east for a homeland.
Caught in a trap of colonialism, of past and present, that continues to shape our futures.
The coast defines us. It finds us in the straits, the basin, the wash.
This water that surrounds enables our mobility, facilitating growth, connecting lands. It really gets foggy in Singapore.
It rarely gets foggy in Cyprus.
I was thinking about maybe the first time my dad saw fog coming over on the Messagerie Maritime Cambodge just before the first Immigration Act. What were you thinking about?
I was thinking about when my grandfather first saw the fog over the Lincolnshire fields after being forced to leave his home by the British occupying forces.
There is deep knowledge of the land that comes from cultures and times outside the Enlightenment. How is this ancestral insight being valued? Who holds it? Who continues it? Who shares it? It is present in the ways that we heal, eat, and create care.
Who has the right to traverse this land, exploring freely, with relaxed shoulders and a leisurely gait, not just as workers tending fields or factories or churches?
The recovery we need is from the trauma of being told and treated as if we don't belong, neither to the communities nor to political movements of arts and the environment. Accusatory eyes, like we're the feds, or stupid. These feelings are real. The spectres are real.
The ecotone suffers the ills of capitalism. The ecotone is the tension of home. Thank you.
Thank you.
With our massive thanks to Celia and Will, we now pass to Liz McGowan.
Hi. Well, I didn't know this, but I'm going to begin where Will and Cecilia left off, which is the house's intention, which are the last words they finished with. So this is my beginning, which is looking at the derivation of the word ecotone. It comes from two Greek words, one meaning house and the other meaning tension. So you get this idea of two houses in tension. And what I'm going to do, it was something that came out of the residency for me, which is about a greater understanding of the way in which I use this idea of ideas and materials rubbing up against each other in order to create meaning in my work. So I'm going to look at some of my work in the past and also leading up to the present work within the context of this. So I'm going to start with a work which is quite different from the other works, which is it's actually a piece of community engagement work that I did about 10 years ago when I was an artist in residence at RSPB Minsmere. And I was due to work to make something which was connected with the tide line, or to create a project. And during that time, there was a massive dump of fishing plastic, basically. And it was the biggest dump of plastic that I had ever seen on a beach. And so it just presented itself to me as something that I had to work with. And so I went to the beach and I collected a fraction of it, which was a van load. And I took it home and I spent several days cleaning it, sorting it. I disentangled every single thread of plastic and ended up with these materials. And as a result of doing research into plastic and realizing how life-saving it is, actually, I decided to make a plastic palace. And so I worked with volunteers and I made a sort of slim structure. And with the volunteers, we created a kind of basic structure, which was the plastic palace. They were fantastically creative. You can see they used the rubber fishing gloves as sort of finials, and there were lots of faces made into it. We put signs at either end of the beach inviting people to come to collect plastic and bring it to decorate the plastic palace. And the response was enormous. And you could sit inside the plastic palace on upturned fishing crates. There was a palace journal that you could make entries into, and there were various bits of plastic that you could thread and such like. But the thing that really moved me was the fact that every time I or any of the RSPB staff went there were always people in conversation in this place. And one of the things that came across most was people would say, we saw this thing from a distance and it looked so beautiful. And then we came up close and we saw it and it was just so awful. So I suddenly had this kind of realization of these two things rubbing together. These two ideas rubbing up against each other and creating a huge amount of reflection and conversation. The next thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to wake up my thing now. Okay. Is a series of cloaks that I made, landscape cloaks, with it, and I called them The Spirit Wraps Around Me. This series poses the question, what would it be like to wear the landscape like a skin? To be sensuously wrapped in those elements. Supposing instead of walking on a footpath or a beach, we were walking in or inside an ever-changing kaleidoscope of texture, colour, light and process. Supposing we were literally cloaked in our surroundings. In this body of work, each cloak is made with materials from a specific Norfolk habitat: tide line, reed bed, salt marsh, chalk stream and barley field. The cloak mediates between the human body and the landscape it emerges from. It's an invitation to immerse oneself in the more than human world, like plunging into cold water. More than that, by referencing ritual cloaks, it opens up the possibility of a connection with the genius loci, the deep spirit of the land. This creative edge or tension in this work is where the human skin meets with the cloak or skin of a particular habitat, and the sensuous and intimate connotations that arise. The invitation is to imagine just that, to awaken the senses. I'm just going to say that this is made from algae, and it was the most impossible material I've ever had to deal with in every single way. In the photos, the cloak is immersed in the land from which it originates, thereby adding an extra layer of context in which the human body is deeply immersed and becomes other by becoming part of the land. A second body of work takes the soot from my chimney and places it cheek to cheek with delicate organic elements that surround me. Lichen attached to soot. Delicate ground mussel shells sprinkled onto soot. Small rodent teeth and scapulae from owl pellets scattered onto soot. The important element for me here is that these two, the natural and then the man-made pollutant, make physical contact so that a direct connection can be made with the effects of my actions. It places me directly in front of my culpability. It means that I have to experience these things simultaneously instead of enjoying a walk in the woods or on the beach and then mindlessly lighting my wood stove. It conveys an immediacy and a reality. In a later series called Absence, I use soot to make the outlines of delicate seaweeds and bryozoa from the Norfolk chalk reef onto a base layer of chalk, and linking my complicity in the climate crisis directly with the vulnerability of the Norfolk chalk reef. Lastly, and this is the piece that came out of the residency that I did in August with GroundWork. This is the straitjacket for the chalk stream. Straitjackets have powerful connotations in our culture of insanity and restraint in Victorian asylums. At the same time, over hundreds of years, humans have done something very similar to our rivers. We have canalised our Norfolk rivers, cutting them off from their floodplains and the rich biodiversity that they supported, and denying them their fundamental dynamic, which is to meander. In these days of such environmental loss, it seems a madness to me to pursue these practices. And so, in putting the vibrant chalk stream into the straitjacket, I am rubbing these two ideas up against each other to make you uncomfortable, to make you think, and hopefully to make you change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Now we're going to have a discussion. If you wouldn't mind, and can we have Will and Cecilia and also Caroline? Do you want to come back just in case there's anything? Ruth. Thanks.
The question for Liz. A lot of your work, I see you inhabiting it in landscape. I just wondered if you had done the same with your straitjacket.
No, well, as with the, I mean, when I originally made the cloaks, it's hard to believe this now, but I had no intention of wearing them. They were wall pieces, and that was it. But then the work somehow demanded that and when I was making them, I was measuring them up against myself, going, well, how long is a cloak, you know? And so, to some extent, when I decided to make a straitjacket, I did do the same thing again. I was going, well, how long does that have to be so that it covers up my hand, that sleeve? And as I was making it, I was thinking, well, here's one piece I'm not going to wear anyway because it's got a riff in it, right? However, since then, the ideas that are developing do possibly mean that I will have to make another straitjacket. So watch this space.
And there, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to quote back William. You talked about ecological art must invite material intervention in the world. And I'd like to know, maybe from you and Cecilia, but also others, what kind of art or what artists do you think are really exemplary at that? And where can we go with our eco art, and who is leading the way? And maybe are you maybe even thinking about artists who affect material change and not just invite it?
I was just going to ask, my question blends into yours, Bridget, but I was thinking of Boyce and Ackroyd and Harvey have got a wonderful King's Lynn connection. Thank you, Veronica. And I saw their film the other day, which is all about what they've been doing recently. But how far can the wonderful work that you're doing in pushing, how can it push against politics if we still believe in politics as having impacts and effects?
Choose your question.
I can probably give a slightly indirect answer, maybe. There's like lots in those questions. I think first of all, this idea of material intervention just comes from I think having. I was talking to someone recently who runs a gallery in Cambridge, and they were talking to me about the work that they show. And I was in this conversation, I kind of realised oh wait, I don't make work that's kind of meant to be meant to be shown. Anything that's shown is kind of a kind of happy outcome of something I've done with people or done in the world, or something that's had to happen. And so when I talk about material inventions, it's something that happens in the world with people, and I find that I'm very rarely making aesthetic decisions. I'm just kind of the practice. I come from a sound background, as to Cecilia, and I can't really look at you because that's so blank way up. And we both come from political organising backgrounds, and we're both trade union representatives and organisers. And it's the practices of listening that come from our sound backgrounds and our political organising backgrounds. In a sense, it's kind of the artistic disciplines melding with the organising in order to kind of just work with people. And so we have this ongoing project, which is running these workshops in port towns around the country. And I mean, as we kind of mentioned, Cecilia and I are both from kind of displaced families who ended up in the UK kind of by force, and it's about kind of going to these places and trying to build these counter archives of like these stories that link these kind of violent colonial histories with like the contemporary ecology, and how the colonial history is still felt in that contemporary ecology, counter-mapping those histories through, and like, you know, that's an artistic intervention there that makes this happen, because we do a series of sound walks, we work with sound with these people, we do interviews, we make prints, and this kind of builds a kind of, yeah, a counter archive of something that was otherwise marginalised. So I guess the intervention bit is that.
Oh, right, you want me to? Okay,
I thought
right,
you
yeah,
were first.
yeah,
I
yeah,
thought
yeah,
you were
absolutely.
going
I mean, I feel like but the aesthetic decisions and the kind of like, yeah, that sort of contact zone, because that's also about what the ecotone is, and we kind of like talk about that in our piece in GroundWork. The contact zone is about aesthetics and politics. And I think that, you know, that obviously has a long history in terms of art history. And so, you know, the decisions that you do take, that we both take, are both aesthetic as well as political. But then just kind of like going back to your question about examples of artists and things like that, then, you know, a few who are maybe really well known, that as well as the people that we've already mentioned, would be like forensic architecture, for example, because, you know, obviously their work is like not only aesthetically impactful, but also it serves as evidence. And we were talking earlier today about the idea of listening, idea of witnessing, and how, you know, the kind of like the outputs, the data, the recordings, etc., that they are creating are actually evidence for things to happen in the world, as well as like the work of A.M. Kangiza, who's done this really amazing work called Oceanic Refractions, which is working with communities in Papua New Guinea around, you know, the loss and like repair of their ecosystems and stuff like that. And so, you know, there's also, I guess, like in thinking from a kind of like art theoretical or art historical perspective, I always think about arte utile and, you know, Tanya Bugera's work, and this idea from Stephen Wright, who writes about usership, and you know, he has this amazing book called The Lexicon of Usership, which is basically about the one-to-one relationship between art and life. And so, you know, instead of these things as being representational, then he essentially talks about, you know, these things as standing for actual things that can make change because they exist in society and function as objects in society rather than things that we're just contemplating. So yeah, that's, I mean, maybe that's what I would say.
And I think the other name that we often come back to is Ultra Red as well, the kind of group of, well, they started out as AIDS activists, right? And they're all kind of a group of anarchists and communists working in the US and now all over the world, mobilizing sound and listening practices as direct action, and it's kind of, you know, lowercase p politics, direct action, and that comes from sound practice, experimental sound practice.
Can I expand the question specifically to Caroline and then Liz to ask to what extent your artistic practice is political or activist in an embodied sense?
I'm not an activist as such, but I feel like I want to... Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Caroline. Don't look at me, because I'm right in the sun. When Liz was speaking earlier, she was haloed. It was the most, I kept taking photos of this gorgeous glow.
I think I want people, through my work, to think about how they inhabit and impact the environment, their environment, and so think about the rock surfaces and the ancientness of the ground we tread on. Yeah.
Thank you. Liz?
I think it's something that has troubled me. I mean, for a long, long time, I was wanting to find a way of making work that engaged more actively with these political issues, and just couldn't find a way that felt as though it had a kind of integrity that I personally could go with. And I think, which is probably why I was talking about what I was talking about, because I feel very sort of excited about that, and it still feels like a very small step, but somehow it feels as though what I have instinctively done is somehow, rather than going out in the political way, is to try and go deeper. And I don't know, who knows whether that will have an effect or what that will do, but for me it's just what I have developed that feels like it has integrity, and also I think it comes from, that approach comes from a place, and it was just something that I read or heard someone say many, many years ago, which was that you have to engage the heart. If you don't engage the heart, then you know, if you want people to take something on and you want them to change, then as well as engaging the mind, on some level you have to engage the heart, and so I think that is something that is also guides me. Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. Do we have more questions? Another hand straight. Oh, I'll go to you and then we'll come to Veronica.
Thank you. Liz, I've seen your soot work, and I was really moved by you speaking about it now, about that absolute interface of our personal responsibility and then that direct relationship with the land. And then I made me wonder, you haven't worn the straitjacket yet, but I was wondering I haven't seen it in the gallery yet, what's inside it, and what materials did you find that it clearly spoke in that similar way to the soot and the owl pellets, and you know, so you've got that fabric. Is there something about the chalk stream that's actually inside it in terms of materials?
Yes, I might not have heard everything you said, Bea, but in terms, you were asking about the materials that I used to make the piece in the gallery. I used what I had, actually, so I used an old sheet that I had been using for beekeeping. The plastic that I used was the plastic that I still have from that project 10 years ago. I used some kozo fibre, which again, that I had. And then the other thing that went into there was my hair. And it's something that was also incorporated into one of the cloaks. And again, that's something that I do as a way of making a visceral connection and saying, you know, it's like I am part of this, for better or worse, I am part of this.
Veronica, you had a question.
I'm not sure how clearly I'm going to be able to articulate this, or whether this comes as a question or a comment, but I'm interested in the whole notion of listening, and that you clearly, I'm addressing really Cecilia and Will, you've clearly, well actually everyone in a way, because you have articulated about listening carefully, and having lived with your work in the gallery for quite a while now, I feel one has to listen really carefully, right with one's ear almost on the ground to hear what you're saying. I mean, I suppose it's clear you're listening, but how do you feel people should be listening to you, and what would you like that effect to be?
Okay. Well, I guess, like, you know, the first step is listening and engaging at all. And so over the last year or so, and this is a project that I'm, you know, alongside the work that me and Will do together, I've been working with a group of community organisations and with another practitioner and friend to convene these listening conversations with different leaders of community arts groups in Thanet. And so what I guess we've learnt from that process is about just the invitation, because quite a lot of the time there is no invitation, or there isn't a sufficient invitation for people to listen to each other. And this was something that I previously worked on in another project when I worked with Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service and Grenfell Impact Communities, that, you know, lots of times community leaders, I was again looking in this kind of like context of community leaders and people who are organising, don't have the opportunity to kind of like really talk and just sit and talk and listen to each other. And I think that as a process is really important. And so, in fact, quite a lot of the time, you know, this is, we were kind of like talking about, you know, what is the function of this piece that's being shown at GroundWork, and we're kind of like thinking about how it's a study or it's a piece of research for the continuation of this project that we're doing, working with different port communities, because I guess it's a prompt or enabler or facilitator for those conversations to take place, or yeah, like it's an opening for that kind of thing to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that is what we said. I think that's all. That's absolutely it. I mean, maybe even more specifically, you know, with that piece, and maybe my practice. I mean, Cecilia and I make radio programs quite a lot. That's often the outcome of these projects in these port towns with these people, and like almost kind of podcasts, or just kind of, rather than having an archive of photographs, it's an archive of sound recordings, and that could be people's voices or recordings of a place. In terms of like the listening to the sound of like that piece or anything else, it's weird that I very rarely, unless it's like specifically a thing that's like an archival piece of sound, I rarely think about people listening to the work I make, because I always kind of have this thing where I say, oh, I work with sound, I don't work with audio. And so I think of sound of being what happens between people and in places, as an experiential, embodied kind of meeting of things, of an interface of an ecotone. And audio being some way to kind of represent that later or somehow preserve it. And that's kind of almost like a thing that I kind of am obliged to do at times.
Sound is relational.
Yeah.
That's what we talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so audio feels like a kind of obligation sometimes. And I guess like a big question that's kind of for a lot of sound people is how you document sound without it just serving the function of evidence, when it's such an experiential and embodied medium that has so much stuff that can't be documented through just it being compressed into a digital representation of that. So yeah, that's like a real kind of ongoing concern, especially like in my current PhD studies. That's kind of an ongoing concern of how I document embodied sonic encounters.
Projected spectrograms.
Say that again, sorry.
Projected spectrograms.
That's a much more complicated thing than I do in my practice. Yes, and that's a whole other thing of you're then trying to visualize a non-visual medium, or trying to kind of do it, and this is like a whole other thing around a lot of environmental art with sound wants to sonify data and do all these kind of things that I find quite immoral. So yes.
Can I just follow through a bit? Because it's both its power and its problem, but it comes across as ambient sound and a confusion, which is what we deal with all the time, both in the way we experience the world, but in the way we have to deal with all these complexities all the time. And in a way, what we haven't done with that work is what I know you wanted to do, and we did talk about, was working with communities. And that seems to be, it needs that next stage to be teased apart a bit and say, I mean, people have noticed the different sounds, by the way, and they've recognised the clanking of the chains particularly. But then there needs to be that follow-through. I feel it particularly with yours, because it so invites that disentanglement, because one feels, in a way, a little bit powerless with it, because there's so much there, and there's so many images, and it's kind of all day chattering away.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know it far better than we do by this point.
But then I think, yeah, and like, exactly, as Will says, you've experienced it a lot more than we have, because, you know, like, having made the work quite quickly in that time period between, you know, having the residency and then installing and all of that. But, like, I guess I always come back to, like, you know, people, when I think about your work, I also think a lot about, you know, all of these experimental performers who do endurance work, and then, because I kind of used to look at lots of experimental performance in my work, and sometimes with lots of, you know, imagery that we find overwhelming. And actually, you know, the world is overwhelming, and in that sense, the piece is, I guess, like, just from this place of, as you were kind of like saying, a reflection of what's happening at the moment, and that was how we felt that we had to respond. Yeah.
In a sense, much earlier when artists were talking about water, and there was a discussion about the act of stopping flow by representation, which as visual artists you experience too. The act of capturing something both changes it and in some way impedes it. I've killed that conversation.
No, ask a question.
No, I was throwing a comment out. Do we have a question? Or do we have a response? Question. Do we have an answer? There is no answer. Answers are extra. Tim, should we go with you?
I'm just saying, if a work of art is inaccessible for whatever reason, is it not part of the overwhelm of information? So, I mean, I can't recall your work, but looking at the pictures, I sort of felt, well, what is the story? And I didn't know what it was. So, is it inaccessible to me as a sort of moderately intelligent person, or how are you trying to get my heart engaged, which is touching on what this is saying. I think that's important, actually, for work of art. So I'll just leave that one floating.
Unless you wanted to respond.
You can have a go at me, but...
Do you want to get into it?
After you.
Shall we bookshelf that one for the time being, simply because I think that's going to be a very big discussion. And there was a question here.
Well, one comment, sorry, but I suppose that there is this tension between the effect and the longevity of what you end up with over time. And I mean, as a conservator, I'm constantly, you know, in that arena, and I'm very aware that what often happens is that it's not the work itself, it's how people interpret it, research it, write about it in later years that actually then starts having an impact in the world. So the ideas exist, the objects exist, the work exists, but sometimes it takes time for it to make sense for the wider society, and it needs to still be there as a thing, or in some form of interpretation, or some capacity for them people to look at, if you see what I mean. I hope that makes sense. I mean, I worked at Bodleian Library for years and years, and I was very aware of a very efficient system of people who would study at in Oxford. They'd then whoosh off and do amazing things, write books, They'd donate their archives to the library, and then they'd get studied and become history. And, you know, I think what a lot of ground up work, whether it's artists, it's activists, it's people doing stuff, is that it doesn't end up as history. It doesn't end up as being studied, being analysed and researched and thought about by the wider world, because it doesn't have a place, if you like. It doesn't archive itself. It doesn't, and it remains fragmented and sort of dispersed and not coherent. And so, and I just, you know, it seems to me that there's a tension often in the sort of work that people do, which is ephemeral, it's going to disappear. And then that longer thinking about how are people thinking about their work over the long term, you know, as, anyway, so I'm not sure how,
I think it's really interesting because, and I completely understand your perspective, I guess like it's very, you know, we have lots of different traditions within the arts, and some of them are kind of like visual and material and kind of very tangible and based on that sort of idea of conservation and curating as looking after and all of those sorts of concepts. And then, you know, there's also like so many different DIY art traditions or ephemeral art traditions, including sound, including music, including performance and all of those sorts of things that, and the kind of traditions that I also come from too. And so, you know, I think even what's interesting today is that now we have the possibility of like, you know, you telling this story and like us having this conversation as, you know, we are holding these archives. And whenever we start to have these conversations, then we are activating and we're rethinking, you know, what are the archives that are within us? What are the archives that need to be expressed to each other that are within us? And I think that's also another way of kind of like thinking about conservation, which we haven't maybe like focused on so much because obviously, you know, the text, the book, the page, etc., has been such a like figure of the Enlightenment, and actually, you know, I guess like in this again the overwhelm of like we have so much information that's delivered to us. Then now perhaps it is an interesting time to kind of like go back to these bodily engagements that are maybe not so tangible or concrete, and actually come back to value those things as well.
It also seems to me, you know, comparing our works in a way, it seems to me that, I mean, they're so different in the sense that, you know, I have taken these two things and rubbed them up against each other, but it feels as though your work is a work not only of complexity but also of process, of ongoing process. And so in a way it feels like the piece in the gallery is like a part of a complex jigsaw that you carry, if you like. And so I totally, you know, I'm really with Veronica in the sense of saying that other bit, yeah.
Oh, well, I'm getting wrapping up eyes from Veronica. Just one very quickly, please. Yeah.
I think we had a wonderful example of the two houses in conflict from Nigeria and of the archive that is being lost. Oh, hello. Mm-hmm. It's not me. It's the archive that's being lost because of the broken
Can I wrap up simply by asking a question that's been asked but didn't specifically go to Caroline and Liz? When you create, do you have a sense of the lasting physical embodiment of your work? Is it made for now, especially when you're making in ephemeral physical materials, natural materials, or is it made as a thing that is going to have a lasting life as its object?
Generally, I would like my work to last, but there are the little panels were definitely experiments in what might happen, and I'm quite interested in exploring that a bit more, because I think we're living in such an unpredictable world. We don't know how the changes are going to manifest, so it feels quite important to really explore fragility more. Yeah.
Thank you. And you, Liz?
Well, at one time, none of my work was permanent, and either it degraded into the landscape or it ended up on my compost heap. But I can't say that that's true now. But I certainly am always on that edge, you know, of not wanting to kind of hammer a nail, and, you know, so they're pretty much always fragile, I would say, and so no, they're not built to last.
Thank you very much. Veronica, over to you, because you'll be wanting to wrap things up.
Just to say thank you very much, everybody. That was really fascinating, and there's still some hovering, unanswerable, I suspect, questions hovering in the air. Over tea, which I guess we'll have now, there's Jeremy Young is here, and he's brought a lovely book called The Thicks, which he'd very much like to show you. Perhaps you could open a copy over here, and then also at the gallery. Oh God, we haven't had that noise before. At 6 o'clock at the gallery, or we might get there before 6. If you have it there, and when over a drink we could look at it again. But okay.
Don't say how long the break is.
Sorry, how long? Oh, should we try and be back by about? Well, give us about half an hour, 20 past.
This is